Welcome to Forest Bathing, Nourishment in Uncertain Times, and this is the Equitable Access module. In this module, we're going to talk about how we can increase access to natural areas and green spaces for people who have historically and currently been disproportionately prevented from accessing social supports like green space, like a healthy, vibrant natural area. You might be wondering, why would we talk about this when it's a forest bathing course focused primarily on helping to restore connection between people in the more than human world? Well, one of the reasons is that some of the people who can benefit the most from that type of connection are often facing many barriers from accessing it. And because Finding Mindful Now and Temenos Rising have a commitment to equity, mindfulness is something that we do both internally, and then we can apply that increased awareness externally. So this is Finding Mindful Now's awareness framework, and it starts with a core. Basically, the core is that all of us are innately whole and resilient. We have life living us continually until this form is no longer here. But the core of it, that innate intelligence, is in everything. That innate intelligence is living trees, it is dividing cells, it is generating storm patterns, it is the composting of material on the forest floor that fertilizes new trees. And at that core, when we move around the circle here, the idea is that in mindfulness and many different types of mindfulness practices like forest bathing, we're increasing our awareness of all of the different ways that life is experienced through our thoughts, our sensations, our feelings, and emotions. So these are life experiences. They're temporary, they're changing, they're continually in motion. Yet we've been conditioned to believe that we are our thoughts, and people can get really defensive and attached to the kinds of thinking and sensations that the body and the mind generate. The more that we become aware of these changing experiences and that core wholeness that's underneath all of it, the more that our interpersonal awareness can also expand, and this can affect our communication, our ability to set boundaries, and foster really supportive relationships. In my experience, it also increases an expansion of what I call humanizing. So our modern society ends up, because it's so focused on analysis, that analysis can actually cut connections rather than fostering them. And people become objects, as do the more than human world and the beings around us. Our modern economy tends to objectify everything. And this creates a sense of separation, and we actually unlearn that core understanding of our innate connection.
As you become more aware interpersonally and personally of some of these barriers, it inevitably, in my experience, means that you also become aware of some of the circumstances that have led to these inequities and these barriers. And they are embedded in policy, they are essentially bias that becomes different forms of oppression, whether that's racism, ableism, sexism, heteronormatism, where people's gender, basically people's beingness, is compartmentalized and objectified and marginalized. So that helps us swing right back around to our role in both internally expanding and contributing to positive change in the environments around us. So, how do we make the outdoors safe for everyone? This is a quote from Pamela Slaughter. She is a founder of People of Color Outdoors. It's a local meetup group here in Portland, Oregon. And you can read the full article that this is quoted from in Metro's recent newsletter, which I will link to. And she makes a note that our legacy as explorers was done, preserved through our journals. We began our new legacy as family camp members, environmental students, and volunteer land stewards. We were usually the only Black people present, but I felt safe in those structured environments. Years later, I walked into a school with my 10-year-old grandson to drop him off for camp. The room was full of rambunctious children, excited for their adventures. We heard a big crash followed by utter silence. Then a child said, "Don't worry, we'll just say that the brown boy did it." They all agreed as we stood there in the hallway listening. I immediately saw that my idea of structured environments being safe was incorrect. My grandson saw it too. Racists were in the structured environment, conspiring to cause my grandson harm because of his color. It showed my grandson that his white peers held his skin color against him in camp the same way they did in the classroom. That was the last time he was willing to go to camp. But I refused to allow the outdoors to be taken from us. In the very first module of this series, we talked about some of the research that shows how nature, without people around, can be a support for mental, physical, and spiritual health. We also learned about how the brain uses prior experiences, current circumstances, our bodily senses, and where we put our attention to generate emotions like anxiety. Racism is a major issue that affects people, and it affects who gets to feel safe outdoors, as you can see in this example from Pamela. Racism is both a direct experience, in this case, someone threatening another child, and racism is definitely learned, even though babies can see differences in things like skin color or body shape. The meaning that their mind generates around those differences is learned from the people around them and from the society that they are in. By the end of this second video, we hope that you'll be able to identify additional supports needed to ensure equitable access to nature, identify resources so that you can learn more about the traditional people of the land where you live, recognize organizations that you can contribute to locally that support equitable access, begin or continue identifying the multiple roles you can play in shifting social and policy environments to be more inclusive for all. These are two quotes, like the one at the beginning, revealing some of the challenges that Black, Brown, and Indigenous people face in the U.S. in an outdoor field and its related industries that are, by and large, run and represented by white people. I'm not going to read the quotes here, but I just want you to kind of get a sense of not everybody feels really comfortable, safe outside, and it's not because of nature, it's because of the other potential people around them. Not everyone has equal access to vibrant, thriving natural areas. When access is present, not everyone feels or is safe being in them. And climate change and development continue to deplete natural area vitality. So just like in the science research section where I had a number of different pathways about how natural areas can lead to our health, these are some potential pathways that I've gleaned from reading a lot of different research about how inaccessibility and inequitable resources or barriers can lead to disproportionate exposure to harm in environments and settings. And this is a series of different pathways to give us more accessible, thriving nature exposure and potential for more positive health outcomes, specifically for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. And many people shorten those groups into people of color. And I have a colleague who identifies as a Black person who is really moving toward simply not lumping everybody together in that larger people of color. So this is, not everyone's going to view that the same way, and so I just recommend you do what's most comfortable for you. Like the last video, we'll go through each of these dimensions of how to address inequitable access so that more people can have the benefits of healthy outdoor exposure. In our first module, we talked about a study looking at how people living near green lots that had been vacant reported feeling better and less depression compared to those living near lots that had not been greened. So we want to increase access to nature and green spaces to everybody. Unfortunately, our current economic structure can mean that when we make large-scale changes that increase green spaces, it can reduce the ability of people who rent or have limited incomes from being able to stay there. It can lead to gentrification. And one of the ways that planners have been trying to address the city harm we talked about in that last module, exposure to things like pollution and loud noise, is by bringing nature back into the city through parks and green spaces. This has a benefit in that it can increase tree canopy, it can increase just our being able to connect with nature, and when it's done on a larger scale, it can also end up contributing to gentrification and displacement. And that's partly because we have a history, at least in the United States, of racism being embedded within policies where Black people and many different immigrant communities and people of the Jewish faith were not allowed to receive access to good term loans for homes or businesses in the 1930s and 40s through a process called redlining, which I'm not going to get into right now. But the point is that those development patterns have maintained a certain amount of infrastructure all the way until now that disproportionately affects where certain types of industry is located, which contributes to Black, brown, and indigenous communities being highly exposed to pollutants, and it makes it much more difficult for communities to have access to thriving ecosystems. So there is a suggestion that while we are increasing green spaces because of some of the research that indicates that Black, brown, and indigenous communities get just as much as benefit as anyone else, we also want to combine that green space increase with an anti-displacement policies and practices. So on the left-hand side is a book written of a series of different case studies, and this is a pretty recent book. I think it's from 2018, called Just Green Enough, and it really looks at urban development and the relationship with environmental gentrification. On the right are a series of policies, and these are just a short list, and this is coming from a community development corporation. Community development corporations are this hybrid type of practice or structure where they purchase homes or they develop homes that are specifically for low-income community members. This is coming from an article of different types of policies, which I'm not going to go over. And these may not all work where you're located. This particular example is over in Roxbury, which is on the East Coast. So different policies are going to be appropriate depending on the community where you are living and the practices, the different types of planning policies that are already in place. One of the major components to increase access is through representation. It's really important that more Black, brown, and indigenous people be in positions of decision-making power, be represented in leaders who are part of outdoor education, conservation, recreation fields, and that they're involved in development plans that affect their lives, as well as to be hired in economic opportunities. So when you're building a new park, can you hire communities who are local, who are identified with that community? And part of the reason of this is that when you see people who look like you, it can reduce the risk of certain types of problems with racism, and it can increase the feeling of comfort. And the challenge we have about this is pretty steep. As of 2019, among 419 national parks, only 23% of visitors identified as a person of color, based on the National Park Service's 10-year survey. And 77% of the visitors were white. However, Black, brown, and indigenous people make up 42% of the U.S. population. This lack of representation shows up in different types of other fields that would be connected to green space access. So for example, 1 in 5 new architects identify as racial or ethnic minority, and they would be contributing to green space landscape designs and developments. among the geosciences, which includes the study of planet Earth, its oceans, its atmosphere, and its interactions with human society. It's one of the least diverse fields of science. Nearly 90% of doctoral degree recipients are white. And in the country's top 100 geoscience departments, people of color hold under 4% of tenured or tenure track positions. The point is to help you see that we need more leaders and more decision makers being represented who can help make decisions that affect these larger communities. And these are three different examples. Africa Town is a land trust, and this is a picture of their website up in Seattle. The middle one is Hacienda Community Development Corporation. They are located in Portland, so they are a group of Latinx focused development trying to contribute to community development through affordable housing, home ownership support, economic advancement, and educational opportunities. And on the right hand is a picture of the Chinook Nation's fundraiser to buy back their stolen land associated with the 1851 treaty grounds at Tansy Creek. Depending on where you live, there are a number of different nonprofit and hybrid types of organizations that are doing this type of work. And I just invite you to start looking if you don't already know about them, and basically using whatever platform you have to draw attention to supporting these groups. The outdoors is also not always accessible to someone who has a physical, auditory, or visual disability. It becomes challenging to navigate different types of spaces when you have different types of neurodevelopment or neurocognitive disabilities. And so these individuals face greater challenges when we don't have some type of design in the landscape of parks or green spaces so that they can navigate the terrain. It's also there's also a high price of entry for some communities in terms of different types of parks. So both of those, universal design and cost of entry, can be barriers. All public parks in the United States have to meet legal requirements from the American Disabilities Act. So that means things like a bathroom or a visitor center and maybe one path that's very small or short might meet ADA requirements. However, those are really minimal standards for accessibility, and it's often still really challenging for people with disabilities to access. And at the same time, these communities may also benefit the most from some of the metaphysical and spiritual benefits of green space access. So universal design is a set of principles about how you design an environment or a landscape to make it as accessible to everybody. So ADA requirements can sometimes focus on, for example, physical limitations, but they may not always fit things that are related to visual or other types of disabilities. And universal design broadens this to help make things more useful wherever you are. And I'm wondering, some people might say, well, but it's a park. It's not like, a natural system is going to cause a tree to fall at the certain spot. But that's not really the point. Parks primarily are ways that we can navigate and connect with the natural world, and park pathways and trails are absolutely developed. And you can make sure that a pathway is wider, or if there's a rock that has to be navigated, that instead of it being dropped right in the center and then you have to go around it, it's placed in a certain spot where people who have mobility devices can navigate it better. So this is just something to look for. You can look up Rooted in Rights and the Disabled Hikers website. I really appreciate. I follow them regularly and get their updates because they have local books about where you can find trails that are accessible for more people. I just wanted to make sure that you knew about them. The other thing about this is that green space isn't meant to be a substitute for adequate supports to mental and physical health. So even though nature access and nature exposure are really, really, really important, they can't completely take the place for some of our other social and economic supports, things like education, access to health care, economic stability with decent wages, and how our neighborhood and built environment is structured. It's estimated that these, so what are called social determinants of health, are responsible for more than 55% of our health outcomes. So this is a really big deal. And I know this can seem a little bit overwhelming, but it's also really cool because you can choose just one area that you feel the most excited about or the most interested in and start exploring ways to make sure that equity is being addressed in the policies, in the people that you vote for, in how you're engaging with the local environment around you. Another component that we want to think about, which we talk a little bit in terms of social environments, is thinking about how are we contributing to creating safer social environments for the people around us. So that might be something like learning to develop some more comfort with the discomfort of interrupting harassment of any kind when you see it, being able to speak up and speak out. And then the rest of this are things for you to think about that I already talk a little bit about in this one of the other modules, but it bears repeating here. To just remind you to be aware of what feels safest to you. You can try visiting first time in pairs or in a group, or bring your dog. And if you go solo, I just invite you to think about scouting ahead of time and asking people you trust where it feels safest, given intersectional identities. I have a number of friends who asked me to go with them because I'm a white-bodied person, and they know that we just won't get as much flack if they're with me. Like, I'm more than happy to, A, I want to spend time with people that I care about, and B, I want to, if there's a way that my presence can help reduce some of the challenges that someone else is going to have to encounter, then I want to contribute that. If you feel comfortable, let a park ranger know of your visit. Some parks increase patrols if there were reports of harassment. This is going to vary. I've read some articles recently where people went into parks departments and found racist paraphernalia hanging up on the walls. That's going to vary based on where you are. So this is just something, it's your own learning curve about it. Thinking about as many parks departments as possible, and philanthropists are starting to look more into funding culturally specific organizations who are leading outdoor education, who are hiring naturalists. So this is actually a great way for communities of color, Black, Brown, and Indigenous community members to be able to engage with outdoor settings, is when culturally specific organizations are the ones who are leading some of these trips. And it's also really important to keep increasing understanding and dialogues across groups of people who differ by features of identity. So what you see here on the left-hand side is it's one of my favorite organizations. It's called the Othering and Belonging Institute out of UC Berkeley. Oregon Wild has been doing a series on diverse voices for different types of leadership, hope, and action around equity. And I can post one of the links in the notes. One of the biggest challenges we have globally is based again on our economic structure and how to continue developing enough housing for people when you develop, you basically bulldoze over whatever natural space is already there. And once something's covered with asphalt or pavement, it can be really hard to get back. This is a picture of, it's in Ontario, and these are housing developments. So you can see that there's all these neat rows of homes and small little spots of lawn and roadways. And this can be very convenient for one single family at a time who has a certain level of money and wealth. However, everything that was there beforehand is now gone. The more that our population continues to grow, the more we're going to have to keep thinking about how to reduce negative impact of land development, and a lot of that just comes through policy. This may be a very dense content area here, and my idea of sharing this is because each of us actually can play a really powerful role in our social relationships with people around us, in the way that we become engaged in, if we have kids and our kids' schooling, if we are purchasing different things from local vendors, can we be looking for communities of color and buying from them? These are two different resources that I've linked here. One is called Mapping Our Roles in Social Change Ecosystems, and the other is called the Social Change Wheel. So the roles one, I just really invite you to go explore, because your role may change based on what you're doing and where you are and kind of what else is going on in your life, and you can still be engaged and involved. And the social change wheel is a series of different types of strategies about things that can actually create change, whether that's participating in a voting letter writing campaign that might be happening, or attending a board meeting, or volunteering for a local organization. There are a lot of different ways that you can be contributing, and I bet most of you already are. This basically is an idea for you to think a little bit about what we've talked about here in terms of equity. And I'm just going to invite you to go look at how close different parks are to where you live. And then I'm just going to invite you to identify 3 nature areas, and this might be your backyard, and just practice sitting in those spots and thinking about, who gets to visit these areas, where are you located, how many parks are near you, and what communities have access. So this is just something to kind of be embraced by nature while you're contemplating who has access to it. This slide has a whole series of different organizations that you can, or sources of information that you can explore further when you have time. And in summary, not everyone has access to natural areas or feels safe visiting them, and there are multiple areas of growth available for people to work together to increase access, to decrease the cost of entry, and ensure more Black, Brown, and Indigenous people own land and are represented in positions of power that affect green spaces, so that more people have access. Thank you for exploring your nature outside, and I will see you in the next video.